I'll start with this image. Before starting the lecture, I was at the office of Director Francisco, and he told me that he went to História da Cidade in São Paulo a few years ago, and he stayed in this apartment. This is an apartment that the História da Cidade owns at the Copan building, designed by Oscar Niemeyer in the 1950s. And they host their visiting professors there. So if you go to História da Cidade now, you see this wall painted blue and this installation on the wall. And the installation is my departure point for the lecture tonight. This is the Copan building in its context in downtown São Paulo. I was teaching at the University of São Paulo Institute of Brazilian Studies, IEB, Instituto de Estudos Brasileiros, in the early summer of 2017, when there was a Biennale, São Paulo Biennale being organized, and the curator of the Biennale, Marcos Rosa, invited me for a chat. I was teaching a course that I had developed at that time called Theorizing Spaces in the Americas, in which I was trying to put together concepts, spatial concepts for our continent. Because we need to recognize that all of our concepts, or at least the large majority of them, come from Europe. And as much as European culture, as much as Western civilization is fundamental for us, and I'm not disputing that, it's also insufficient. So we need to work on the insufficiencies of Western culture in order to understand spaces of the Americas. So I was teaching this course at the University of São Paulo, and the curator called me and said, Fernando, this is a great idea. It fits very well with the Biennale, and I want you to do something. And sure, great, that would be amazing. And I'm a scholar. What I do most is write, right? So I was thinking about a text, I was thinking about writing something. And we started talking about the space of the Biennale. There will be expositions at the Biblioteca Mário de Andrade. Mário de Andrade is a very important Brazilian intellectual and writer from the 1920s, one of the men behind the Semana de Arte Moderna in 1922 in São Paulo, which will be now 100 years, the centennial is coming up. And so he said, I have a whole wall at the Biblioteca Mário de Andrade, and I want you to do something. And the whole time we were having this conversation, I was thinking about a text and about how many words I could fit in the wall. And we were talking about the wall, and suddenly he said, you know, I don't want any words. What do you mean? That's all I have. I mean, I only have words. No, I want an installation. I don't want text on the wall. I don't want the text. I want an installation. And I don't know what got to me, but I said yes. And I went back to Austin with that idea. I just made a huge mistake. I committed to building an installation and a Biennale. I've never done that before. It's not my thing. I'm not an artist. I'm a professor of architecture that teaches studios every once in a while, but mostly writes. I write books. But okay, I got with that, and I had the whole summer to think about it. And most of you know, I was thinking about Urbana-Champaign that very summer. But I got the summer to think about it, and then I came up with an idea. And the idea was I will use the warm-up of my studio as a way to build this installation. I will use the project for my students to understand the Americas, and I will use the help of my students to build this installation. So back in Austin, first week of studio, they had to think about the architecture of the Americas. And here you have the photograph of the Pampulha Chapel after it was drawn and edited and made fit into a 2 by 3 inches little drawing, and then cut with the laser cutter to produce this mold. But I didn't want only iconic buildings. I wanted every architecture of the Americas. So they had to draw favelas, they had to draw apartment buildings, they had to draw shotgun houses, they had to draw trailer homes. I wanted all the typologies of the Americas because I wanted 250 pieces. And those 250 pieces would have to somehow represent all the typologies of all the Americas. So the students took up the challenge and they did the drawings, and we edited the drawings together, and they run the laser cutter either in acrylic or in plywood, as you see on the background. And then we went to Brazil. And in Brazil, we went to a 200-year-old ceramic place, workshop, close to Ouro Preto. And with that ancient knowledge of that ceramic, we spent a weekend there doing this. We had some tests that we did in Austin, and we fired some pieces, but it was a big challenge to produce 250 pieces in Ouro Preto. We produced over 300 pieces. We needed a little bit more because everything can happen when you fire, when you transport, when you mount this installation. But it was a beautiful weekend there that we did this. We had some students from Brazil, my students from Texas. We had a group from São Paulo called Doma Oficina that would help us install the pieces at the wall in São Paulo later, because I would not be able to be there for the installation. And all of us, we came together and we did this. And this is the result. It now is not permanently, but for many, many years, it will be at this apartment of História da Cidade that is in the Copan building. Now, I did that in the fall of 2017. And 2 or 3 years later, reflecting on that, for reasons that I will explain shortly, I came up with 5 concepts that I think are in this installation. They were not completely conscious, they were not completely rational at the time. I didn't depart from the concepts in order to propose the installation. I did the installation because I thought it was a great thing to do, and I realized that those 5 concepts were there. And those are the concepts that I will present today in this lecture. So first, I love this installation because it was a collaboration. You can't tell where my work ends and somebody else's work starts. It's not that I did all the drawings and I gave to somebody to do the laser cuts molds, and then I gave to somebody else to produce the ceramic pieces and somebody else install. No, everybody worked on everything. The idea was mine, the initiative was mine. I was the conductor of this installation, but it's like an orchestra. Everybody's playing their own instrument, and what you hear is the ensemble. So the collaboration is one thing that I love about this installation. The second thing is that it represents multiplicity. You see here in this photo that some pieces are glazed and other pieces are raw clay, just fired ceramics. This ceramic in Ouro Preto has a process of using minerals from that part of Brazil, Minas Gerais. That's where I'm from. That's from the name mines is from the mineral content of that land, from the gold of the 18th century and the iron ore that is there today. Some of you might have heard about 2 horrific accidents that happened in Minas Gerais. One in 2016, right before we went there, the other in 2020. The tailings dam of some mining companies broke, and billions of tons of toxic mud came down. The first one obliterated a city of 5,000 people and killed, I think, 17. The second one, we were less lucky over there, and the restaurant of the mining company was right below the dam. And when it burst, it was lunchtime and it killed 300 people. So I was in that, reflecting on that, and you see that we glazed the buildings that we recognize as being, let's say, special architecture. So I have here, you can see the Orquidiorama in Medellin, the Torres del Parque in Bogota, the city of Chichen Itza in Mexico. So typologies that we recognize as being very special. But the other ones, the clay color that you see here, the pink ones that you see here, they are ordinary buildings. And that multiplicity is very important for me. The collaboration and the multiplicity, the idea that I'm looking at the entire built environment and not only some very special buildings, makes me think that we need new concepts for understanding the Americas. That the concepts that we use, the way that we organize the knowledge of architecture is still very Eurocentric. And we have not yet been able to elaborate and raise to the level of mainstream architectural conversation concepts that are from the Americas. To do that, we need to expand our scholarship boundaries. So we need to use the books and use the design knowledge, but open it up for other kinds of knowledges. Our traditional knowledges are pretty constrained, and we need to expand those boundaries. And part of it is looking at the entire built environment, not looking only at very special, very expensive buildings built by very wealthy clients. And finally, we need to engage what I call the double standards of knowledge and culture. So in order to elaborate on that, I will start with the double standards of knowledge and culture. It's something that I see almost every week in the regular operation of a school of architecture, right? It's the elevation of some kind of concepts, some kind of conversations to the level of knowledge, and the demeaning or the relegation or the marginalization of other kinds of information to the level of culture. Now, I say that because I drew this map some 15 years ago, 2006. And I love that the poster of your lecture series this semester is, in a way, very much related. It's a cousin of this map with the Tropic of Cancer there. In this map, what I did was I took the four books that we use more commonly to teach modern architecture in English. So the book by William Curtis, the book by Vincent Scully, mostly used in the US, not so much international, but the book of Kenneth Frampton and the book of Jean-Louis Cohen. Those three, Curtis, Frampton, and Cohen, are used all over the world. And Vincent Scully was not so much anymore, very much used in the US. But I did a little dot in the map for every building that those books mention. And the result is, I mean, it's not explicit, it's pornographic. The concentration of those buildings in the North Atlantic. And of course, it's not a coincidence that since World War II, the whole planet is policed and it's organized by the military organization of the Treaty of the North Atlantic, the NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So architecture in a way mirrors the military organization of the world and how it's systematized. But as I said, those things are part of our traditions, those things are part of our knowledge. They are somehow fundamental. I'm not here to dispute them. I'm here to work on the insufficiencies. I really want to work on the big voids. If you look at this map, there are gigantic voids in the areas that are not contemplated. And when I was reading Decolonial Theory many years later, I found in Walter Mignolo this conversation about knowledge and culture. The same military war, the same system, and Mignolo calls this word system, the same word system that creates this concentration in the North Atlantic also calls this part knowledge and some other part culture. So when we think of knowledge today, all over the planet, we think of the United States, and here we are part of the largest knowledge machine in the world, the US university system. I'm a part of it. We are all part of it. But we think of Western Europe, we think of Japan. Those are the places that we associate with knowledge. And then everybody else on the planet we associate with culture, right? Brazil has a lot of culture. Mexico has a lot of culture. India has a lot of culture. We need to flip that dichotomy for many reasons. One reason that it comes as no surprise, but as I said, we are in the biggest machine of knowledge production in the planet. We are part of it, the US higher education system. And yet, those books that we use to teach modern architecture are all Europeans. William Curtis, Kenneth Frampton, Jean-Louis Cohen. What's wrong with us? Why do we do that? So this is the map that I was referring to that only the people in the auditorium could see before. And I was referring to the fact that those writers are all Europeans. So in reaction to that, I think we need to flip the knowledge culture dichotomy. For instance, I live in Texas, and there is no piece of knowledge that supports the idea that people are safer by having more guns. There is no piece of knowledge. The only thing that explains that is the culture. So my proposal here is that we make an intellectual exercise to flip that dichotomy and pay attention to our culture. Pay attention to the culture over here, pay attention to the European culture, pay attention to the culture of the wealthy parts of the planet, and acknowledge the amount of knowledge that there is everywhere else. There is a tremendous amount of knowledge that we don't treat as knowledge, we don't evaluate as knowledge, we don't engage as knowledge because of the restrictive idea that knowledge is only some pieces of information traditionally manipulated by the institutions of the North. So this, of course, reflects directly into architecture. Most of you know this drawing. This is the tree of architecture that was part of the Bannister Fletcher books. The first book is from 1898, but the tree doesn't show up until, I think, 1907 or 1911. It's early 20th century. And the tree crystallizes in a drawing this idea that architecture has roots in a number of different disciplines, but it has a trunk. And the trunk is a choice of Germans and British in the 18th century. They created this trunk. They created this idea that Western civilization comes from Greece to Rome, from Rome to the Middle Ages, from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance, from the Renaissance to neoclassicism and modernism. This is a construction. The reality is much more messy and much more complex than that. And this construction, again, reinforces the idea that whatever comes from that trunk of Greece and Rome and the Renaissance, etc., belongs to knowledge. What does not come from that trunk, what is in the branches, the lower branches of that, and I can look closely here, it's Mexico, it's India, it's Egypt, it's Peru, the Andes, it's China and Japan, belongs to culture, and it's known history. So history is only European history. Everybody else is prehistory or non-historical. Those things are repeated so much that they get into us, and we naturalize them. We need to denaturalize them. We need to show how artificial they are, how arbitrary they are, how Eurocentric they are, in order to denaturalize them. I will later in the lecture explain why this image is important to me, but this is pretty much what I'm trying to do in the last few years, is to use the Americas as the mirror to understand the construction of architecture in all its tools, all its skills, all its development. I want to understand the role that the Americas played in all that construction. And you have to bear with me because I will explain it later, a little bit later. One of the ways that I'm doing that, when I wear the hat of architectural historian, I don't know how much of an architectural historian I am, but I write books and I write architectural history and I teach architectural history. So I'm comfortable with this hat. And when I do, I write things like that. This was published earlier this year. And I expanded that little map that I did 15 years ago. And I really looked in detail into the canonic books of architecture to see how they represented the Americas. Did the Bannister Fletcher mention the Americas in the first edition of the book? Yes, they did. And they wrote that there was nothing of value here. There was a lot of interesting things in Mexico, but not worth mentioning, not worth developing. Did Pevsner mention the history of architecture in the Americas? Yes, he did. And he repeated the same thing. He said, there's a lot of interesting architecture in Mexico, but I can't talk about that and not talk about architecture in Spain in the 15th and 16th century, so I'm not going to talk about any of them. And it goes on and on and on. My favorite is Viollet-le-Duc. Viollet-le-Duc is amazing. He's one of the foundations of our scholarship. He's one of the foundations of preservation theory. And yet, in 1875, he wrote 23 pages about Mexican pre-occupation, pre-Hispanic architecture, without never having set foot in Mexico. He never came to Mexico, but he wrote 23 pages. And his thesis was, this can't be built by barbarians, Amerindians. It has to be built by Europeans. So we have to consider the possibility that Europeans crossed from Norway and Sweden all the way to Greenland and into North America. And the fact that they did not build anything in the nowadays USA, the northern part of North America, it's because they couldn't amass the resources. Only when they got to the Central Valley of Mexico and they were conquered by the barbarians in the Central Valley of Mexico, their knowledge was able to build the architecture of the Toltecs, the Olmecs, the Mayas, etc., etc. This is Viollet-le-Duc. This is not 500 years ago. This is 1875, and one of the foundational pillars of our discipline. Anyway, we have to engage that erasure. The Americas have been erased from the traditional historiography of architecture, and we need to engage with that. The other concept that, the second concept that is very central to me is that we need to expand the scholarship boundaries. I also didn't have that clearly when I was doing my PhD, and I finished 20 years ago. But I was, I think, in a way, trying to expand the scholarship boundaries. I was working with the modernism being appropriated by the middle classes in Brazil. And then later, in the years 2003, 2004, I was doing work in the favelas in Brazil, and I looked at those buildings built by very humble construction workers, and I saw the domino over there. There they are. The idea of 6 columns and 2 slabs is everywhere in Latin America. Everywhere that adopted reinforced concrete as the material of choice, you have this skeleton, very adaptable, very flexible. And if you look back at what Le Corbusier wrote in 1915, he wanted flexibility and adaptability. So it's a compliment to him. It's not like many of my senior colleagues told me at the time that I was denigrating, I was desecrating the memory of the important French-Swiss master. I was trying to expand the boundaries. I was trying to see architecture and architectural values in the favelas. My first book was about that. And the one that I published in 2019 is also about that. The book that was published in Portuguese and Spanish is a lot of my articles that were published only in English, because I was a tenure track professor and I had to publish in English, and I had to publish in the journals that the profession recognized as important journals. I translated them to Portuguese and Spanish and edited 2 books in order to expand that conversation. I also was trying to expand the canon, let's put it that way. I also was trying to bring new conversations and new buildings to the canon. In 2010, Luiz and I had the idea of writing this book. We thought for a decade that somebody else, especially somebody more senior and more accomplished, should write a book about the entire 20th century, the entire Latin America. The years passed and they never did. So we took the challenge, said, Luiz, we have to write it ourselves. We know this thing. We've been teaching that for 10 years. We have to do the effort. It took 3 years of writing and 1 year acquiring the damn photographic permissions, because we had 300 illustrations on this book and at least 70 required permissions. And it's a nightmare. I don't want to do a 300 illustration book ever again. But we did it, and we published the book, and we published this book to be a map. As we, of course, acted as curators, deciding which buildings and which architects and which sites and which movements and which concepts would come inside the book in order to produce a map so that everybody can do their own itinerary into that map. The book is not comprehensive. No book is ever comprehensive. No map can ever be comprehensive. And I say that because I traveled a lot with this exhibition. We did that after we finished writing the book and after the book was, when the book was in production. And we printed that on a canvas that is 6 feet by 30 feet. So 1.8 meters by 9 meters. And we travel with that. There's one printed in English, one printed in Spanish. And we traveled with that to 23 cities. And the interesting thing is that every city that we would get and we would put together the exhibition and give a lecture and talk about the book, somebody would ask, but why didn't you include this architect or that architect in your book? It can't, it's not comprehensive. It's a map. The map can't have everything there. There's a beautiful story by Jorge Luis Borges about a civilization that wanted to produce a map on 1-to-1 scale, and they abandoned the map because the 1-to-1 scale is useless. It doesn't have any purpose. So the book we understood as a big map, and the timeline of the 20th century is another big map in which we were trying to see the relationships. There are amazing books on every individual country. So there are amazing books on Brazilian modern architecture, Mexican modern architecture, Argentinian, Chilean, Colombian. But when you put them all together, you start seeing the relationships between them. And then the opportunity to go to 23 cities with that exhibition was an amazing thing that we did in 2015, 16, 17. And that clicked something on me. At that time, I was also reading a lot of the decolonial theory, and I realized I don't really want the Rio Grande, Rio Bravo to be recognized as a border. I don't see that border anymore. I see the Americas. I see a lot of common experiences in all of the Americas, from Alaska to Chile. So I kind of outgrew the idea of being a Latin Americanist, and I think of myself as somebody interested in the Americas and in the special history of the Americas. And that has several implications. Those are some of the important books published at the end of the mid-1990s, both of them 1995, I think. I only read them in 2005, 2007, but they changed my way of thinking, especially Arturo Escobar. I realized that I spent a decade or more adjectivizing modernism in order to explain the Latin American experience. I had to talk about incomplete modernization or conservative modernization or insufficient modernization or something. When I read Arturo Escobar, he explained that there is no modernity without coloniality. Modernization, colonization are one and the same. So I don't need to adjectivize Latin American modernization anymore. All modernizations are incomplete. All modernizations are conservative. All modernizations are also acts of colonization since 1492. And that's one more reason for me not to recognize the border, the Rio Grande, as a border between one America and another America. It's a colonial border. It's the same way that the border between Brazil and Argentina or Colombia, Venezuela, those are all very much colonial borders that when we look at the territories, they have a much deeper history that do not belong inside those borders. And this deep history is, in the case of the Americas, related to two very big tragedies that we have not yet fully acknowledged. It was great to see Benjamin reading the land acknowledgement at the beginning of my lecture today, because that's one of the big tragedies of this land. This land means all of the Americas. The Amerindian Holocaust, the fact that 90% of the population, Amerindian population, perished in the first century after contact. We are here freaking out with a pandemic that has a lethality between 1% and 3%, depending on our age group. And it's pretty difficult and pretty scary and impactful. And we will live the rest of our lives with the impact of the COVID pandemic in 2020, 2021, and hopefully not 2022. We'll see. Imagine that translated into a 90% mortality rate. The best way to envision that, to conceptualize that, I found in a book about anthropology in Guatemala, and the author wrote, to have an idea of what it means, just think of the 20 people you love the most. Really quickly, who are the 20 people you love the most in your life? Now choose one to survive with you. That's a 90% population reduction. That's the population reduction of the Caribbean in the early 16th century, the population reduction of the Mayas, population reduction of the New England in the 17th century, population reduction of the Amazon is still today. It's still going on. The second major tragedy of our land is the fact that our ancestors, my European ancestors, our European ancestors, profited from bringing people from Africa to here, enslaved, to substitute exactly the 90% that died and collapsed the food production of all of the Americas. We have also not acknowledged that history, the impact of that history fully in our buildings, in our spaces, in our sites. We are moving in that direction very slowly. And last year was some significant steps ahead, especially talking about how schools of architecture reacted to the Black Lives Matter protest of 2020. There was progress. We are acknowledging that, but we still have a long way to go. So one of the things that I articulated, and I think here I found a contribution that is mine, a contribution that I can claim as a scholar, is what about the parallel process of European occupation of the Americas and the development of architecture as an independent discipline? In 1992, Aníbal Quijano wrote a very powerful sentence, and he explained that it's not that the Americas participated in the development of modern capitalism. There would be no modern capitalism if not for the European occupation of the Americas. I am bold enough or naive enough to transfer that statement to architecture, because it's not a coincidence that architecture as a discipline was codified and systematized in the 16th, 17th, and 18th century. It's, I claim, and I articulate that in this publication and a few others that are coming out soon, that it is no coincidence that architecture was systematized as a profession around the same time of the European colonization of the Americas. So, paraphrasing Quijano, I propose that it's not that the Americas participated in the rise of architecture as a discipline. There would be no architecture as we know it if not for the European occupation of the Americas. And the reason that I can claim that is geographers have already decoded that for us. Geographers like Doreen Massey, Ricardo Padron, and Patricia Seed have shown that the occupation of the Americas triggered a switch in the representation of space. And the switch in the representation of space is the change from itineraries to maps. So the difference is in the itineraries, and Cristoforo Colon used itineraries when he came to the Caribbean. And even Magallanes used itineraries. All of the first navigators used itineraries. In the itinerary, you, as the navigator, as the person who moves through space, you are in the representation. All of us who are old enough to have a teenagehood or a young adulthood without iPhones, remember that to get to a friend's house, we needed an itinerary. Nobody walked around with maps of the city. We have an itinerary. Take this avenue until you reach that avenue. There's a gas station, turn right, go 3 blocks and turn left behind the church and live in the yellow house. You are inside the representation to do this movement through space. In the map, the person who is moving is outside. The person who is controlling the representation is outside of what is represented. This tool was developed in the 16th century as the Europeans got better and better at controlling territory thousands of miles away from the center of their kingdoms. This tool was developed for the occupation of the Americas, not because of the occupation of the Americas. So when we see that difference between the person who is representing is in the representation And this is one of the maps of the Relaciones Geográficas that we have at the University of Texas. Those are from 1572, and Felipe II of Spain ordered all the settlements in the Americas to produce maps and send to him in Madrid. And you can see how this is an itinerary that explains the archipelago, the territorial organization of a community in Mexico. Those tools, the tools of transforming spatial representation into mathematical formulas, they were developed for the colonization process. And they were developed by the colonization process. They are one and the same. Modernization, colonization, and the geometric tools that we use in architecture are all part of one big process that the world went through between the 16th and the 18th century and was led by Europe and resulted in a gigantic advantage for the Europeans at that time. So Dürer, when he was codifying this mathematical representation in the Netherlands in 1525, is exactly the same time that Cortés had just taken Tenochtitlan and Pizarro was getting ready to take Cusco in the Andes. From there, you have René Descartes. From there, you have the theorization of this process. So the process was being invented, the process was being developed, and parts of it were developed before the first arrival of the Europeans in the Americas by Brunelleschi, by Alberti, etc. But most of it was developed after. And in the early 17th century, René Descartes systematizes that in the separation between mind and body. And that is a crucial separation for us to understand the modern colonization dichotomy and to understand what happened to architecture afterwards. Because the mind here is the mind of the white European male, the only rational being in that construction. Everybody else, the ones who are not male, half the human population, not Europeans and not white, are in the side of the body. They are being represented. They are not the ones representing. They don't control the variables. They are plotted in the various maps of and drawings of the colonial era. This allows me to elaborate, and this is my latest publication of a few months ago, that abstraction is a privilege. The whole process of abstraction, not every abstraction, I have to say, is spatial abstraction, because abstraction in general is much broader, and human beings have the capacity for abstraction way before 1492 or the colonial era of the 15th, 16th, and 17th century. But spatial abstraction is a tool of control, is a tool of imposing the will of a few over the backs of the many. In that way, we need to engage spatial abstraction and develop new ideas to think about the Americas. This is my next concept. We need new concepts. In 2016, the MAUBA, which is the Museu de Arte Latino-Americana de Buenos Aires, did an exhibition called Verbo America. And the curators were Andrea Junta and Agustin Perez, I think. I know Andrea very well, so big fan of her work. What they did with the collection of Latin American art that they have, the best collection in the world of Latin American modern art, was to shuffle the paintings under other concepts. So instead of talking about Impressionism and Cubism and abstract expressionism, They were talking about other things. They organized the paintings around the periphery, which is a condition of Latin American cities ever since, or the mestizaje, or the feminism. They used other concepts to put the paintings together. Well, the exhibition lasted only about 6 or 7 months, and the Malba reverted back to traditional ways. But there was a seed there in the sense that we need new concepts. The concepts that we have inherited from our Eurocentric Western civilization are insufficient. So we put a colloquium together in Austin in February of 2010, 3 weeks before everything shut down and we could not travel. And 20 scholars came from all over the world. Actually, the pandemic was already around, and one Italian scholar could not come to Austin because he had been in China over Christmas. And the US had already shut down the possibility of visitors that had been in China coming to the US at that time. We had that colloquium and we discussed issues like labor. This is the Brazilian Congress being built in 1959. How can we discuss modern architecture without engaging labor? If you look at these men, they have no protective gear and they have not even gloves. Some of them are barefoot and they are making the rebar for the Brazilian Congress. This is the Senate of the Brazilian Congressional Building by Oscar Niemeyer. We need to engage labor. We need to engage the environment. All of those beautiful works in reinforced concrete that we love so much, they existed before in wood planks of the formwork. And those wood planks are the deforestation of the Ohio River Valley, the deforestation of the Brazilian Southeast, the deforestation of the Canadian forests that are happening right now. We need new ways of discussing our architecture. Only form and geometry is insufficient, if not very privileged. So I started writing about this, reading the architectural history of the Americas through the lenses of coloniality. And this book will come up early next year. It's already, we have a cover, and I am about to receive the final proofs of the book. And we are proposing 7 kind of new concepts to analyze the spatial history of the Americas. The concepts have to do with food production. We don't call it agriculture because agriculture implies a very Western way of food production, which means you kill everything in a specific plot of land, and then you put one species there to have maximized production. There are other ways of food production in the Americas that don't work that way. We have to engage the issue of water, we have to engage labor, we have to engage gender, we have to engage race. Those are some of the concepts that we are proposing. The fourth concept that I want to talk about, and I don't know how much more time I have. I'm afraid I am going over time here, but I will try to wrap up. There are 2 more concepts. The multiplicity of influences is very important. I already mentioned the Bannister Fletcher book of 1898 and the Tree of Architecture and how that created a dichotomy. This is the book that Viollet-le-Duc wrote in 1863. I talked about it too early. I should have waited for this slide to talk about it, but I already told the story. And this is the slide that I want to talk about when I talk about multiplicity of influences. We were sold this idea over here. We were sold the simplicity of this idea that the history of Asia is European prehistory. Then you have Greece, you have the Christian world, you have medieval Christianity, and then you have modern European world. We will show the simplicity of that because it erases many, many other influences and many complexities. The diagram on the right, those diagrams are by Walter Mignolo, by the way, is a much more accurate picture of where we are and what's happened before our so-called modern era. We need that diagram for architecture. We don't have it. We have this, which is the tree of architecture from Benjamin Fletcher. We need that diagram in architecture, where North African architecture contribution into the Mediterranean is acknowledged, where the Byzantine world is acknowledged. I learned in school, like I think most of us, that the Roman Empire ended in the 6th century when the barbarians from the north crossed the Alps and invaded Italy. It was only when I went to Russia that Russian scholars called my attention. The Roman Empire did not end. They moved. They moved to Constantinople and they lasted another 1,000 years. They ended in 1450 something. And this changes our whole conception of the simplicity of our architectural historiography. We need to expand those boundaries and bring all those other pieces of knowledge into our conversation. And I am only talking about the Atlantic world, right? I only know about the Atlantic. I know about the Americas. I know about Europe. I know about the Mediterranean. I know nothing about the African way of building that also influenced all of this. I know nothing about South Asia, the Hindu and Muslim South Asia way of building. I know nothing about East Asia, Chinese and Japanese way of building that is also connected to this diagram here. So we definitely need to expand. And the book that is already printed and we are launching on October 22nd is part of that. From that colloquium in Austin, we published 2 books. This one is ready, and we are launching it in 3 weeks. And it has contributions from 10 scholars that are helping us decolonize the spatial history of the Americas. This book is more about architectural history. The other one is more theory, more conceptual. And we need to do that because the world is doing that, and we are not catching up. This is a photo from Santiago, Chile in 2019. And this is when the rebellion against, I'm confused, what was the source of the rebellion? It was not tax reform. Tax reform was Colombia, was increasing in transportation prices, right? So it became major dissatisfaction with the way that things are working in Chile. And we can't see it very well because the chat bar, the zoom bar is, let me see if I can move the zoom bar so we can see the very top. Yeah, the very top of this image is very important because that is the Mapuche flag. And the Mapuche flag is flying on top of General Baquedano. And General Baquedano is the Chilean army general who pacified the south of Chile, the Mapuche territory. And by pacification, you can imagine it's the same way that we pacified the Native American tribes in the Ohio River Valley or in the south. It's the same way that we pacified all the indigenous groups all over the Americas. It's by sheer extermination and terrorism. But the statue of Baquedano is not there anymore. They brought it down. And it's part of this whole process of reevaluating our public monuments and the way to tell our history. I got away from. And then I will get to my final concept, which is the idea of collaboration. Arturo Escobar is one of my central influences. He had a career as an anthropologist in University of North Carolina, And he wrote several very important books. Encountering Development is the most celebrated, the most cited. But after retirement, he's now writing about design. And he's now writing about how design can be a tool for transforming the world. So I wanted to show you this because this is one of the very few buildings that I worked as an intern. So 30 years ago, I was in architecture school and I was an intern in a firm, in an office, and they were building this building here, which is a cultural center for a small town in Minas Gerais. And one day I was the intern that had to travel about 60 miles from Belo Horizonte, where we lived, to this little town. And I had to go there once a week and check on the work and report back to the office. And those windows here were supposed to be a rectangle triangle. So one 90-degree angle on the triangle. And I got there one day and they had built this. And I panicked because it was not what was in the drawings. And I tried to talk to the construction workers and they said, oh, no, it's the same triangle, the same size. We just did it different because it was more, I don't know, more simple. But I was the intern. I panicked. I went back to the office. And when I got to the office, the architects were very calm and very easygoing. And they said, you have to admit that construction workers will change the drawings. That's part of what we do. And they had this mandala in one of the walls of the office. I have never paid attention, but they brought this from the wall to show me. And the mandala says, all design is probabilistic because all humans are architects. All humans are architects because all design is probabilistic. And I remember going home very frustrated, like, why am I going through 6 years of architecture school if every human is an architect? There's something is not working here. But I think there's a lot of wisdom there. There's a lot of wisdom in understanding that we, as architects, we do not control the buildings. We like the idea, we sell the idea that we are in control, but we are not in control. When you look at closely, capitalism is in control of all our buildings. And we are one more of those humans who are working on probabilistic design. Because what you draw is not what's going to be exactly built. And if you pay attention with really good lenses, you see that everybody changes the final state of the building a little bit. Even the undocumented immigrant from Guatemala that is sanding and staining the floors is also changing the final state of the building a little bit. And the amount of influence that one have in a building is completely uneven, right? The owner has a lot of influence, the banker who is financing, the real estate consultant who is charged with selling the building. All of those people have a lot of influence. The architect, of course, does also. But we are a big collective enterprise. We should discuss our skill and our industry as a big collective enterprise. So when Arturo Escobar writes about design for the pluriverse, he is bringing the best of the design potential, which is the potential to envision a better world. So I just spent more than an hour here talking about all the problems in the design process, all the ways in which design is elitist and leads to exclusion and leads to colonization and leads to exploration. Yes, they are all true. And we need to engage that. But there is one thing that I want to finish this lecture on, which is the fact that it also has a tremendous empowering power, which is we can envision a better world. And nobody is better at envisioning than us design professionals. So when we engage with all those problems that I just described, we can use them as sources in order to do what we do best, which is to visualize a better world for the future. In all this that I talked about, the development of architecture in the 16th century, in the Latin languages, the word for design is projecto. And that means to project, right? To launch something towards the future. In English, we got only the word for projectile, bullet, cannonball. But in the Latin words, design is to project towards the future. We can do that. We have the tools to do that. We need to learn from all those problems of the past and the present that I talked about, and bring the energy into designing something better. We're going to fail. The better will always be a moving target towards the future. But that's where I wanted to end this talk today. And thank you so much for listening to my